Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. I know a lot of you are really curious about this whole DG thing, so we're going to spend some time with it today and really try to unpack what's going on.
Yeah, it's definitely been making headlines.
So before we dive in, just to be clear, we're talking about the U.S. DOGE Service Temporary Organization, not, the meme, the Dogecoin.
Right, right. Definitely not talking about cryptocurrency here, though there is a connection.
Oh yeah, that's actually where I wanted to start. I mean, come on, the name Doge, pronounced just like Dogecoin, and the website even had the Shiba Inu dog on it at launch. Like, what's going on there? Is this just Elon Musk being Elon Musk?
Well, you can't deny he loves to tap into internet culture. I mean, remember when he renamed Twitter to X?
Oh yeah.
So is this, a playful approach to try and make government seem cool, or, is it undermining the seriousness of it all? It's a valid question.
It definitely makes you wonder. So, for those who need a quick refresher, DOGE was Elon Musk's brainchild under the second Trump administration. The goal, to make the federal government a lean, mean, efficient machine.
It was this super ambitious project. They wanted to cut spending left and right, slash regulations, get rid of old technology, shrink the federal workforce, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, and all in a crazy tight deadline, right? They're supposed to be done by July 4, 2026. Like, that's the drop-dead date for the whole thing.
The semi-quincentennial, no less. So, you got to wonder, is that even possible? Or are they just setting themselves up for failure?
Talk about pressure. And to make things even more interesting, they brought in this whole group of really young operatives. I mean, we're talking 19 to 24-year-olds running around government agencies with a ton of power. They even got this nickname, the Doge Kids.
Yeah, there were stories about them refusing to give their last names, calling longtime federal employees dinosaurs, having these one-way interviews. It was a whole thing.
Definitely a culture clash. So what do you make of that? I mean, bringing in these young guns, is it a stroke of genius or a recipe for disaster?
Well, it's a mixed bag, right? On the one hand, you've got this fresh energy, these new perspectives, they're digital natives, comfortable with tech, and they're not afraid to shake things up. And that can be really valuable, especially when you're talking about modernizing government systems. But on the other hand, experience counts for something.
Yeah, you can't just learn that overnight.
Right, and there's always the risk of, arrogance, thinking you know better than everyone else just because you're young and tech-savvy. And that can lead to mistakes, big ones.
And of course, there were some pretty high-profile controversies involving these Doge kids, like Marco Ellis, who had to resign after those racist social media posts surfaced.
Yeah, that was a big one. And then Musk polls ex-users about whether to bring him back. It's like, what?
And then there's Edward Korestein, this 19-year-old who supposedly had security clearance issues because of his past hacking activities.
It all felt very unconventional, to say the least.
To put it mildly. And then there's Musk's reaction to all of this, accusing journalists of doxing DOGE employees and asking the U.S. attorney to investigate threats against them. Like, is this all just a giant reality show playing out in the government?
It definitely raises questions about transparency and accountability. Are they trying to silence criticism? Are they being too secretive? I mean, these are valid concerns.
Okay, so let's talk about DOGE in action, because they really did shake things up. Like USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, Musk called it evil, then their website gets taken down, their overseas work is stopped, and they're hit with mass firings. It was brutal.
It's like they pressed the reset button on the whole agency. And Musk's demonization of USAID is pretty worrying. I mean, discrediting these institutions, while it might be effective in silencing critics, it really erodes public trust in essential services.
Yeah, it's like, who do you trust at that point? And it's not just USAID, right? They also went after the Treasury Department, putting in their own operatives, like Tom Kraus and Marco Ellis, who reportedly got access to key payment systems.
And that, of course, led to lawsuits and a lot of people freaking out about data security and the potential for abuse.
So, again, this tension between speed and responsibility, are they cutting corners in the name of efficiency?
And that same pattern plays out across multiple agencies. It's like demand access, face legal challenges, and then worry about data security. Over and over.
Like at the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, there were all those reports about sofa beds in the director's office, a private server being installed, which led to another lawsuit, and then this push to report employees involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives.
So you got to ask, is this really about efficiency, or is there something else going on here?
Right. And then there's the GSA, the General Services Administration, which is suddenly operating like some kind of Silicon Valley startup, an AI-first strategy trying to cancel federal leases.
And over at the IRS, they're being told to identify non-essential contracts, provide access to personnel and system data. Musk even claimed he deleted an entire tech division, though that's been disputed. It's like a digital tornado ripping through the government, leaving chaos and confusion in its wake.
And facing a ton of pushback. I mean, we're talking protests outside OPM and the Treasury, people chanting, nobody elected Elon, so it's definitely not all smooth sailing for Doge.
And yeah, you're right, not everyone hates what DOGE is doing. Some pretty big names have actually come out in support.
Oh, really? Like who?
Jamie Dimon, for one, Brian Armstrong. Even a few Republican governors are on board with the idea.
So it sounds like there is some agreement, at least on the need for change.
Yeah, and I think you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who's against the idea of, say, reducing defense spending. That's one area where DOGE has actually gotten some bipartisan support.
Okay, that makes sense. But I'm guessing not everyone who was initially excited about DOGE is still feeling that way.
You're right, there are definitely some Democrats who are starting to have second thoughts, especially about how aggressive and secretive DOGE has been. It's making people nervous.
Right, like who are these guys really accountable to?
Exactly. And that brings us to the legal challenges, which are piling up fast. I mean, DOGE is facing lawsuits left and right.
Like what kind of lawsuits are we talking about?
Well, for starters, they're being accused of violating the Federal Advisory Committee Act. FECA.
Vaguely, remind me.
It's basically designed to make sure that advisory groups to the government are balanced and transparent. And DOGE seems to have just skipped over that entirely.
So they're being accused of not playing by the rules.
Pretty much. And that's not all. On top of the FACA violations, they're also dealing with lawsuits over privacy concerns, with accessing sensitive data at places like Treasury and OPM. And then there are state lawsuits over federal aid freezes, access to the Treasury, and of course that lawsuit trying to stop the USAID shutdown.
Wow, it sounds like they can't make a move without running into a legal roadblock.
It does seem that way. And I think all these legal challenges really highlight this fundamental tension at the heart of DOGE.
So, tell me more.
Well, on one side, you have this argument that DOGE is absolutely necessary. Like, we need to shake things up, get rid of the bloat, the weight, the inefficiency in government.
Yeah, that whole drain the swamp mentality.
Exactly. But then on the other side, there are all these concerns about due process, transparency, and the potential for abuse of power. Like, are they cutting corners? Are they trampling on people's rights? It's a valid question.
So it's a battle between efficiency and accountability. Like, which one wins out?
Exactly. And it's fascinating to see how the courts are trying to sort all of this out, because it really does have implications for how our government works. Like, can our system actually handle this kind of rapid, disruptive change, or is it going to break?
Right. It's like a stress test on democracy almost.
I like that, a stress test on democracy, because that's what we're talking about here.
Okay, so we've talked about the meme connection, the ambitious goals, the controversial DOGE kids, the agency shakeups, the legal battles. It's a lot. But before we wrap things up, I want to go back to something that's been bugging me, this whole secrecy thing.
Yeah, the cloak and dagger aspect of DOGE definitely raised some eyebrows.
You mentioned concerns about transparency earlier, and I remember reading that Musk wanted to keep DOGE communications out of the public eye. Like, he wanted to shift oversight from the Office of Management and Budget to the White House Chief of Staff.
Right, and then there was that whole thing about them stopping using Slack because they were worried about public scrutiny.
It just seems weird, right? Like, if you're all about government transparency, why are you being so secretive?
It's this contradiction that keeps coming up. It's like move fast and break things versus accountability.
And it's not just about internal communications either, right? There's also the issue of how they're presenting their findings to the public. Like, remember that waste.gov website?
Oh, yeah. The one that was supposed to track government waste, but ended up being a default WordPress landing page for some fake architecture firm.
Oh, man, yeah. And I think it actually violated Trump's executive order by using the word diverse.
The irony's not lost on me.
Seriously, talk about a cell phone. But even putting that aside, the whole doge.gov website itself is pretty bare bones. It's basically a Twitter feed and a few links.
And what about those receipts that Musk promised to provide, to show all the savings that the DOGE was generating? Yeah, those receipts never materialized, even though Musk kept saying they were being maximally transparent.
So it's just confusing, right? Like, on one hand, they're claiming to be exposing waste and inefficiency, but on the other hand, they're operating in this way that makes it really hard to actually see what they're doing.
And that lack of transparency just fuels so much of the skepticism and distrust surrounding DOGE. Combine that with the aggressive tactics and, let's be honest, some of the controversial figures involved, and it's easy to see why people are worried.
So where does that leave us? Is DOGE a force for good, a necessary evil, or something else entirely?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I don't think there's a simple answer. I mean, DOGE has definitely exposed areas where the government could be more efficient.
Like that whole Schedule F thing, making it easier to fire people in certain policymaking positions.
Yeah, that was a big change. And look, I think most people would agree that technology can play a role in modernizing government operations.
Right.
But efficiency isn't the only measure of a successful government. You also have to consider things like fairness, equity, the protection of individual rights.
Right, because you could have a government that's super efficient at doing really terrible things.
Exactly, and that's where the concerns about DOGE methods become really important. If they're achieving efficiency by cutting corners, ignoring due process, or eroding public trust, then the costs could very well outweigh the benefits in the long run.
So it's not just about what they're doing, but how they're doing it.
That's a crucial point. DOGE has kind of forced us to confront this tension between efficiency and democracy. And finding the right balance between the two is something that we're all going to have to grapple with.
Okay, so as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, it seems like DOGE is this giant experiment with the potential for both good and bad outcomes. Yeah, it's like we're all holding our breath, waiting to see how it all plays out. But okay, let's zoom out for a second. I mean, what's really driving this whole DOGE thing? Is it purely about efficiency, or is there something more going on here?
Well, that's a great question, and it gets to this whole other layer of DOGE that we haven't really touched on yet, the ideology.
Oh, you mean like how they were targeting those diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI initiatives right off the bat?
Exactly. That's a perfect example. It suggests that DOGE isn't just about streamlining government, but about pushing a certain set of beliefs about what government should and shouldn't be doing.
So is it fair to say they're using efficiency as a cover for something else, like a more ideological agenda?
That's one way to look at it, and it's definitely fueled those accusations that DOGE is this undemocratic power grab. Like nobody elected Elon and all that.
Right, right. Because at the end of the day, he wasn't elected to do any of this.
Which raises all these questions about, who gets to decide what a better government looks like. Is it a few tech guys with a vision, or is it a broader, more democratic process?
Okay, so let's play this out for a second. Let's say, just for argument's sake, the DOE actually succeeds. They hit all their goals, they cut spending, they streamline the bureaucracy, they modernize everything. What does that world even look like?
It's an interesting thought experiment. On the surface, it sounds pretty good, right? A leaner government, less waste, more innovation.
Yeah, but,
and this is but efficiency isn't the only thing that matters. You also have to consider things like fairness, equity, protecting individual rights.
Right, because you could have a government that's really good at doing things that are totally unjust. Like, history is full of examples of that.
Exactly, and that's where the concerns about DOGE's methods come in. Like, if they're achieving efficiency by cutting corners, ignoring due process, eroding public trust, then the costs could end up being a lot higher than the benefits.
So it's not just about the what, but the how.
Exactly. And DOGE is really forcing us to think about that, Like, efficiency and democracy, they don't always go hand in hand. Figuring out how to balance those two, that's a challenge for any society, especially in this day and age.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm honestly left with more questions than answers, but I do feel like I have a much better understanding of what DOGE is all about and why it's stirring up so much controversy.
And that's the point, right? It's not about having all the answers. It's about exploring the complexities, the nuances of a topic. And DOGE is definitely complex. It's got this memey internet culture vibe on the one hand, but then it's also dealing with these really fundamental questions about government, power, democracy.
Right, it's like this weird collision of the future and the past.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even with all the technological changes happening, the basic questions about how we govern ourselves, those haven't gone away.
Well, to everyone listening, I hope this deep dive has sparked some curiosity. Keep digging into this DOGE thing, explore the sources, form your own opinions, because this is important stuff.
Yeah, the future of government, the future of our society, it depends on informed citizens who are willing to engage with these tough issues.
Well said. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. It's been a wild ride.
My pleasure. Always happy to explore the unknown.